Hi there, it's me, Jordan Van Haslo. Welcome to Jordan Van Haslo and Friends live on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. Let's get on with the show. Hello, everybody. Our next guest is a writer, photographer, celebrity interviewer, music critic. His work has been featured in Washington Post, Entertainment Weekly, Vibe, and Spin. And he's also authored a number of books, including the biography Luther, The Life and Longing of Luther Vandross, his own memoir, and a novel, and he has a forthcoming book about Janet Jackson coming out. So I'm so happy to welcome him to right here to Showtime. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Craig Seymour. Welcome, Craig. It's such a pleasure to meet you.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I want to learn a little bit more about your background. I was reading and, doing some research and just kind of, reading up on you and kind of where you've been. You seem to have a very, very, very interesting story.
Thank you. I mean, it's the only story I have. So I hope it's interesting, but it's just me.
So tell me how did writing begin? Did you kind of come out of the womb like, sprouting prose, or is writing something you kind of came to later by accident?
Well, no, writing was not something I came out of the womb doing. I mean, I come from a very, like my grandparents on my mother's side, one's like a cab driver, the other was, she was kind of cleaned office buildings and stuff like that kind of work, but she was a hat maker on the side. So I mean, I was raised with a real work ethic, that everything was work, and even creative things were about work and deadlines and do this and that. So I never really saw writing was kind of something I was interested in, but I didn't really see the path toward making money with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then, and I guess the way writing pays these days, I guess maybe I still do. But that's a side note. But I've never been like one of those. I wasn't one of those like huge readers as a kid. Like I'm reading the classics and reading that, but I always liked to read, entertainment coverage and music magazines and all of that kind of stuff. So I think in a lot of ways I was training myself for a future career without really knowing that could actually be a career.
Right.
And then after college, I went to grad school basically because I couldn't get a job, and like they were offering me a little bit of some 2 or 3 cents to to be a grad student as part of a fellowship. So I went ahead and did that. And then the more I was learning to write about pop culture, but in an academic sense, I felt this need of like, well, why am I writing about this for just 2 or 3 people when I could be writing about this for people that are actually engaged in this pop culture like I am? And so that kind of started my journey of, I started writing for local gay publications in Washington, D.C. And then I started writing for the Post. And then, it was very organic. I just would write, I would get it. If I got something published, I would then, this was in the fax machine days now. And then I would fax my clips to something else. And then, something else would come. And it was just kind of a slow progression. And then I just became very passionate about trying to tell the history of Black music to a mass audience, but
yeah.
Keeping the integrity of deep research and critical thought that kind of comes from that people in academia do, but just to use language to make it accessible to more people. And I'm not saying everybody has to do that. I'm just saying that's just my thing,
Yeah.
Did that answer your question? That was kind of
no, it perfectly did.
Okay.
It perfectly did. Is there any one article or profile that you wrote and got published that was the moment you were like, yeah, okay, I'm like a writer. Like I'm doing this. Is there like that one
Probably the next one that I write, I may think I'm right. No. No, I'm not one of those people, because I think that's also irritating when people that have achieved a certain amount in a thing, they're like, oh, I still don't feel like I've. Well, yeah, but a lot of people are still trying to get where you are, so you have to recognize that. I think what it was is I had started to write for the Village Voice, and at the time, Village Voice music coverage was kind of like it wasn't as big as like the Spin magazines, the Rolling Stones, and the Vibes, but it was kind of like the gateway. Like you could get edgier stuff, and they gave a chance to new upcoming writers more than the big publications. So I started writing for The Voice, and then when Brandy and Monica released The Boy Is Mine, they asked me to write a review for it, and it was going to be the lead review of the music section, which means it's the full page, it's art, it's the whole gag. So when I got that, and then I got a lot of great response to it, that was kind of like, okay, I'm in this game. I can see what, and I can think I can do my thing. So yeah, it was probably that moment.
Oh, that's wonderful. How has, now that everything, it's really interesting. It's really sad what's happened to print publications. I used to work for many years at Time Warner, back when they still owned Time Inc. So I used to have to go over to the Time Life building all the time to do, work with internal clients. And it was always
over there.
Oh my God, it was so wonderful. You walk in, there's the Eames chairs, and like everybody is like, there's like there was like a pride there. Like they were, because Time Inc. was like the Cadillac of publications.
And Entertainment Weekly, when I worked there, was under the Time Inc. umbrella.
Yes,
so
yeah, all the People magazine, all of it.
Yes.
And it was just so wonderful. Like it was just so of it's like you practically imagine Don Draper walking through with a scotch in his hand. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so I was there, and I participated in spinning it off from Time Warner into its own thing. And it was just in working there, that was when it was really clear that like it was a dying business. And it was just so sad. Like it was so sad. And you could see just like because so many people there were like lifers, right? People who like started in the 60s in the mailroom and were, and it was as you saw this just it was just, I don't even know if the word is despair. It was just like a very like a sadness, almost like when you see like a down on his heels aristocrat, like where it's like threadbare. You can see it was glorious, and you can see that there's still this pride, but it's like there's like no hope left. So I just went on a big tangent. I sort of got to actually have a question. What you were talking about.
But I love it because that brings back a lot of memories because I worked in that Time Life building, so yeah.
But you mentioned getting a great response from that Village Voice article. And so I'm thinking about the time pre-internet. Now everything is digital. So you write an article for like an Entertainment Weekly, which I don't think exists anymore, right? Didn't they shut that down completely? I think.
In terms of print, yeah, but I think it exists,
digitally still.
But online or something, yeah.
But like now, an article gets posted and like immediately, you get feedback in the comments section. Do you find it helpful, or do you kind of wish that there wasn't that immediate feedback, and that if people wanted to write you, they would have to like really be thoughtful about it and like go pen to paper and then mail or fax you? And so when they wanted to write something, they really wanted to write something.
Yeah, and I would get a lot of prison mail too. Whenever I wrote something in Vibe, I would get a lot of prison mail. But anyway, and shout out to everybody. Nothing bad, but I'm just saying. Yeah, one thing that I'm really glad at is by the time we're talking about like Twitter, 2008, and everything like that, I sort of reached a point in my career, and it still am, that I'm able to only write about things that I'm really passionate about and really care about. So when people respond to that, I don't care, because I said what I said. You know what I mean? I pulled the needy leaks on it. But at an earlier point in my career, like when I was just taking any gig, you know, oh, can you review this album? Sure. And not even knowing what the album was, you know, like I'm going to take everything. And I'm really glad that I'm not in that part of my career, because then I think there probably were times that I reviewed something or wrote about something where I might not have been the best person to do it, and didn't know all that much about the kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm glad that that could just quietly die, and I'm not being like attacked about that for, you know, decades and decades and decades. So, but no, but what I like now is just the fact that like people can, through social media, they can rediscover something that you've written. They can. So I really like. I find that people online, and I knock on wood on this, but you know, the industry is very trend heavy. Like one, you're up, you're down. You know, one day you know all the editors at this magazine, and then the next day they're fired, and you don't know anybody. So in terms of just in terms of just sort of feeding that desire to keep understanding that people appreciate what you are doing, so you can keep going. It's often hard to get that from the industry, but I get that a lot from social media. So I'm very grateful for people that interact with me on social media, because it does make me feel in a very instant way that what I'm doing is relevant and important or whatever.
Yeah. Talk to me about book writing. How did the Luther book come about?
Well, I you know, I guess it was sort of a natural. I'm always one of those people that are just sort of like, what's the next logical step? Because I think I'm always kind of looking for the next thing, not necessarily like in a just fierce, ambitious way, but just kind of like, I just believe in purpose, and I believe in kind of growing into your purpose. So I think you should always be looking at kind of how you can push that a little bit further. So I knew that book writing, especially at the time pre-internet, was a way to have my work have a little bit more permanence than just being in like newspapers and magazines that people throw out, and
Throw
you know, at
away.
the end of the week
Yeah.
or something like that. That especially not being able to prefigure how much stuff would be accessible on the internet, it was kind of like, let me do a book. And
Right.
so I was kind of chasing a lot of book ideas and stuff. And people really don't realize how different the journalism game is from the book publishing game. So it's like, there are not even a lot of people necessarily like within the journalism world that can help you make that transition. So anyway, I was kind of
Mm-hmm.
doing this and pitching different books, and everything was being turned down, and this and that and this and that. But when I was talking with this, I was in conversation with this one agent that wanted to represent me, and this was around the time that Luther Vandross had had a stroke. So I had done
Okay.
a magazine feature story on him. So I just said to the agent, "Hey, do you think anybody would be interested in a Luther Vandross book?" And they were like, "Yeah." And literally, like, I spent that weekend writing a proposal, and within a week, I had my first book deal. So that's kind of how that came about. And then I just like being able to devote myself to something big as opposed to like turning out a whole bunch of little things. So that's kind of how I
Uh-huh.
stayed with it.
That's so fascinating. So what's your process in terms of getting all of the information and deciding kind of like a what angle or what to focus on in the book? Like, do you work like directly with the artist, or do you kind of like work around the artist and then kind of compare notes? Because I always wonder, especially like when people write their memoirs, I'm sure they heavily paint and gloss over certain things, and maybe hyperbolic in a way that they shouldn't be in some places, etc. Just as a result of, we all have ego. How do you
Yeah, I've never done anything in collaboration with the artist. I mean, I've interviewed them for it, but I've never, yeah, I always,
Mhm.
what I basically do is I basically read every single thing I possibly read about the person and the subject. And then what I'm always looking for in writing the book is just, where are the stories? Because I think we understand
Right.
it's not about the information, it's about the story. And we understand concepts in the context of a larger narrative. So I'm always looking for just even nuggets of stories, or even like a bit of a story in this article, another bit of the story, and then I can kind of put it together. That's always my thing. I always want to hook you with a story, tell you what I need to say, and then kind of leave you with a little bit of a, well, what happens next?
Right.
Did that kind of answer your
Right.
question about
No,
okay.
it completely did. It completely did. In that instance, did the subject like the book, or did you find out if the subject
Well, if we're talking
the
about
subject's feedback?
Luther, if we're talking about Luther, I'm not sure Luther ever was able to read the book because he was still dealing with those issues that were from the stroke. I mean, I never really got an official response from his camp or anything like that, but I really wasn't looking for one. You know, it's
Right.
the kind of thing, like, I knew that I wrote it as a tribute. I knew that I was trying to let people have a broader context for under appreciating Luther Vandross's artistry. At the
Mm-hmm.
same time, you know, I've discussed things that I think the average person wanted to know, and those don't always correspond with what an artist would like you to know about their life, or what their family would like you to know about their life. And that's just one of those things you learn to live with, you know. But I don't think I know what my intention was, and I know what the response of readers have been. You know,
Yeah.
that's always respectful, but whether or not somebody that knew him or knew his what he would have wanted doesn't like something that's on page, 197 or something, because that they perceive that as embarrassing, I don't know. But I can't really concern myself with that.
Yeah. No, totally. So you're working on a book on Janet Jackson now, right? That has like,
Yes.
okay. So how is?
Almost finished. It's I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, no, no. You said it's almost finished.
Yes.
Fantastic.
And what's always so fun about the research process and doing something like this is that, Janet's been a part of my life. I can't remember life without Janet Jackson. And so, I mean, I know so much of her story and always have been a fan. And I've interviewed her twice for two Vibe magazine cover stories. But even in that, going back through the stuff in a micro kind of way and looking, oh my gosh, this happened this year and this happened this year too. And just kind of putting somebody's life together in a narrative. It's just been really interesting. I've been learning a lot, and I thought that there wasn't anything possibly more I could learn about Janet.
Uh-huh. And turns out that there's a lot more there. She really has had a really interesting career, right? Starting as like a child actress and then having her pop career. And now she does a lot of movies again. I think she's had a very interesting journey.
Yeah, she has, and it's just weird that people have these weird. Sometimes these narratives that can be constructed around like an album launch or something can take on lives of their own that aren't really correct. So for when she came out with Control, which was her third album, they wanted to make it seem like that was kind of a rebirth. So there was a lot of like publicity about, oh, she finally has found her voice and she's finally dedicated to music and all of this kind of stuff. But the truth of the matter is, Janet started singing on stage with her family in her Las Vegas variety show. And she performed music on Soul Train, American Bandstand, when she was on Good Times, when she was on Different Strokes. So the idea that she had just discovered music then is wrong, but that was just a convenient narrative to sell the music at the time. And people just latch on to these things and don't ever really kind of critically break them down.
But they're bombarded with that too, right? Because again, this is that same time period we were talking about, right? With the Bruce Springsteens and the Michael Jackson Thriller and the Tina Turner, where if the timing was right for that.
Exactly. Yeah, the timing was right. You're exactly right. The timing was right for a big blockbuster album, and all of these acts had kind of gone, because people don't understand, like, a label has to be so behind you in terms of money, in terms of staff resources, to blow your album up to be a superstar album. So what happened is, by the time Michael had been big, Tina Turner had been big, I think Arista had launched Whitney Houston, Well, then A&M realizes, oh, we have this Janet Jackson project, where a year before we might have only thought that this could be a successful R&B thing. Now we think that this can be a huge pop album, so we'll put all these resources into it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't even necessarily mean, in this case, of course, she worked with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, and the music was excellent and all that kind of stuff. But when you look at the trajectory of people's careers, when they go pop, that's not even necessarily the time that they are at their highest degree of artistry or whatever. It's just the time that the label thought that they could really make some money with them and blow them up into that market. So many confusing things about those type of issues, but yeah.
So in terms of last question about the Janet Jackson book, so like, are you still doing more research, or is it like, are you like just typing away right now? Like you have all of your notes and you're just typing away?
Well, I wish I was typing away, but I'm one of those people that's still old school and write everything longhand. So that, which kind of takes it, which makes everything take that much longer. So yeah, I'm scribbling away with my Pilot pens, but no, I'm not really researching. What I'm doing now is kind of like plugging certain holes, because what happens is, one thing that I think people don't realize when you research artists is that sometimes, let's say Janet can do an interview this year, okay, but she might be telling the story of something that happened, I don't know, like 1978. You know what I mean? So then I have to go back. So then there are things I might find researching later years that are actually relevant to earlier years. So then I kind of have to go back to that and just make sure that was correct. So I'm kind of in that process right now.
Got it. That makes sense. So exciting. So exciting.
Thank you.
Talk to me about your memoir. I always think it's really wonderful and interesting when people write their memoirs. I like the idea of like exposing myself and being honest in a memoir. I don't know if I if I if I have the gall to do it. How did writing a memoir come about for you?
Well, it was really like most things in my life. It was kind of like just I didn't go into it with that intention. Um, but I after I wrote my first book, my Luther Vandross biography, I was kind of I of course I think I already said this, that I liked that whole idea of putting a lot of work into something that is long term, is going to live on the shelf or wherever for a long time. So I was trying to think of another idea. Things didn't work. They wanted me to write like a Whitney Houston biography. I didn't want to do it. Things like that. So then finally, one of the ideas, I was getting to the end of my chances in pitching. I'd gone through multiple agents, talked to multiple editors. So finally, one time I was just like telling this person, well, I used to be a stripper in grad school. So if that, and then they were like, oh my God, what? You should write about that. Blah, 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 blah. Wasn't even my intention, but I was like, sure. So I ended up doing that. And there were a lot of bumps in the road, but ultimately that's what ended up being my memoir, All I Could Bear. So yeah, and it was one of those things, like I didn't necessarily intend to do it. I'm glad that's really a part of my body of work now, because I was able to, pay tribute to Gay DC, which helped raise me and everything like that. So I'm really, when I look back, I'm very pleased that that happened, but I can't front and be like, oh yeah, I always wanted to write, because it wasn't like that.
So aside from the Janet, what's next for you?
I think, well, what's really next is just I'm taking control of my own work, and I'm really trying to be entrepreneurial, and I'm self-publishing my stuff now. So which is going to allow me to actually produce more once I kind of get everything up and running. So I plan to self-publish the Janet, and then I have a couple of more books in the works because the thing about it is the mainstream publishing industry is just, they're only interested in, like, in the same way film studios used to produce smaller films and bigger films. It's like now all they want to do is do Batman, part 638. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So mainstream publishing, I kept having to water down my ideas in order to try to get interest from agents and editors in mainstream publishing. And then they weren't even paying enough to really sustain me in the process. So I was just like, let me set up my own thing and I can write the things that I want to write for the audience that I know that I already have, you know what I mean? And just do my thing without having to worry about all of that, and also be able to have ownership and control of it. So yeah, so there are a couple of other books all dealing with kind of like R&B or, queer issues with music and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah. It has to be very liberating to like do your own thing and say, this is what I want to work on and this is who I want to market it to. But I imagine it's also a little frustrating because all of a sudden you're not just the writer, you're also the IT guy, you're also the social media guy, you're also the publicist, you're also the researcher. How do you balance doing all of that in this world? Like I know you run a Substack and like you have to tend that. You have your books on the side. You have to make sure that those are moving along as they need to. You're on Twitter. You got to make sure that how do you manage all of that? I personally find it all so overwhelming.
Well, I think it is overwhelming, and like I think I manage it by just like not. I know that there's only but so much I can do in a given day, and sort of anytime I feel that being over being so stressed, I just break down like what do I have to do right now, and what do I have to do, and some stuff just doesn't get done, and some stuff just it takes a long time for it to get done. So I do my schedule and I kind of like think how much I can do each day, and like that's what's taken Janet so long, because it might be a couple of days from now that I'm able to get back to that because I have other things that have come up in between then. So, I mean, my whole thing is just that I just have to give myself grace, and I just have to let things happen when, not always when I want them to happen, but just when they can happen, given that I'm just one person and I can only do but so much. And I will never get this life back. So it's like I have to have some quality of life in the process of creating these things too. So yeah, I just I do what I can do, and I don't really. This is gonna sound horrible, but I mean, I push myself creatively and I push myself artistically and to grow into my craft, but I don't feel that I'm going to be productive. I stay up all night every night or do all this kind of stuff, because it's not true, and it will just be a nightmare. So I just do what I want to do when I can do it and try to do the best I can do.
There you go. Do you think do you think in the current landscape, do you think it's easier or harder for young people to launch a career as a writer or a journalist now, say, compared to when you launched your career?
Well, I think it's definitely easier in terms of just going from zero to like getting to the starting point. You know what I mean? Because you can put your ideas out there on Twitter. You can write like long essays on Instagram as an Instagram caption, as people do. There's a lot of ways to get yourself out there, but there are less opportunities to have a lot of attention for people to just kind of like, essentially, when if you were in back in the day, if you had like a Rolling Stone cover story, or in my case, like a Vibe cover story, that was like going viral. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because basically something you wrote is everywhere and people are giving attention to it. I think now you have a harder time doing that, because I think, as you said earlier, people's attention aren't just focused on a few things. They're kind of scattered. So I think it's easier to get your voice out there, harder to kind of make a big impact. And the thing that concerns me the most, kind of like you were talking about those Time Inc. employees and how some had been there forever and really knew all these kind of everything. I was trained by a lot of those people and got to learn a lot about journalism, a lot about writing from those people that I've carried with me to this day. But I think a lot of younger writers don't get the chance to work with these veteran people who basically were put out to pasture or, what, given buyout deals or what have you. So I
Mm-hmm.
do sometimes worry that the younger generation, even if they're writing a lot, they're not working with people that are experienced enough just to give them a little bit of, oh, maybe you should try this, maybe you should do it this way, that way. So I think the opportunities to grow have lessened, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. I also feel like there has been, and not necessarily with like the major publications, but I also feel that there has just overall been a loosening of like journalistic standards. And I think, that comes from the fact that, a lot of the people who write online, didn't go to J school, for example. And so like, it's really interesting. Like I'll read a lot of articles that are kind of presented as news, but then they're really just kind of like an opinion piece and like have a lot of hyperbole in them and
Yeah.
speculation in them, things that would never like get approved if you were writing for like an entertainment weekly. And so I wonder and worry like what that paired with like artificial intelligence, what does that mean for journalism down the line when when Entertainment Weekly sits next to jordanlovespopmusic.com,
Yeah, I mean, it's troubling in a lot of ways. I mean, it's really troubling when, I mean, sometimes I don't know if you've had this experience, but I have it. Sometimes like somebody will be like, I'll hear about a new artist and I'll look up this person and like there are a zillion things written about the person, but like not one comprehensive profile. It's all like all of these little, this person was seen dating this person was holding hands with this person had a sex tape leaked. And I'm like, I don't even know where this person's hometown is. Like, who is there? I mean, usually we would get profiles of people that, new artist spotlight and be this people. I used to edit that section in Vibe, and it's just, you can't just I can find somebody's Instagram, I can find what they ate for breakfast this morning, but I can't just find like basic biographical details of people that have top 10 records, and that really frustrates me because I think that there's been really this divide. Well, back in my day, we had critics, and I was mostly a critic, and then we had like entertainment reporters, and these people were trained in journalism, just like your White House reporters or anything like that, and they would really go through a story and report it. I think with the internet, we have this kind of subcategory of like entertainment writers, bloggers that just it's so it's not clear what their standards are. So they're in cahoots with some of the publicists, and then they do things like go to a lot of like events that celebrities pay for them to go for and all this kind of stuff. And it's just this weird kind of subcategory of like, what is this person reporting on and what is the usefulness of this particular information? It's just,
right.
I feel so much of entertainment reporting is kind of in that lane now.
Yeah. Do you find just when you contribute to publications and things, any publications and things now, do you find competition more stiff, or do you find it harder to place articles?
Well, I'm a weirdo in that I'm not that good at pitching. I'm one of those people that just kind of like need to do what I say I'm going to do. I've just never been that good at pitching. So I'm not one of those people that are just always pitching editors and stuff. I'm sort of grateful that a lot of times I have editors reach out to me about something that maybe I tweeted or something, or an artist that they knew that I'm interested in. So yeah, I don't really feel any competition that way, but I think it's largely because I don't really put myself in that. Because the thing about it is, I'm not the best person to write an article about the hot new person or anything like that. I'm not trying to compete with younger writers about what's going on
Right.
today. I really think that what my value is to be able to offer either some historical perspective on what's going on today, or kind of doing more of a deep dive into the type of music that influence what's going on today. So I feel like I'm pretty clear about what my lane is, and it's kind of it's in a way where I don't think I'm really competing against a whole lot of people. I'm more just kind of trying to figure out what I have to say that people are actually interested in hearing about, or editors interested in paying for, you know?
Yeah, yeah. You just said something that's really interesting. So I'm just curious. But as far as talking about like trends, right? We spoke earlier about kind of like the trend of how music was being launched and stars are being made in the mid 80s, early and mid 80s. You talked about how, you know, the early 90s there was like a reconfiguration and like all the middle-aged performers are kind of put out to pasture, and we got the young like black girl groups, and we got Smells Like Teen
Yes.
Spirit, and it became
Mm-hmm.
very rock became very young again.
Yes.
So where do you see, if you were talking about like trends like that, what do you see in this particular moment in the industry?
You know, I just struggle in looking at the current landscape. And I didn't feel this way like maybe even 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but just looking at the current landscape and just not knowing if it's because I'm getting older that I just don't see what people are doing, or that there's not a whole lot going on. Because there are moments in musical history where just things aren't particularly going on, and that's fine, or that you don't really understand what is going on because it hasn't come together into one moment. You know what I mean?
Right.
Kind of like the way hip hop was in the early 80s and stuff like that. It was like a 12-inch here, a 12-inch there, a song here. Looking back, when you put all that together, you can see a movement, but at the time it seems very disparate.
Right.
So I just I don't see where, I don't particularly like when I listen to like the latest pop song and I'm just hearing sort of a spin on disco that's already been redone by like that Kylie Minogue used to do, that somebody else used to do, that finally goes back to the original disco source. And I've been listening to disco ever since disco was born. You know what I mean? So it's like, I want that thing that is just different. And I haven't found that. But then I also know that a lot of times that can be because of your age, and that I'm not sort of like on the, it takes to being immersed in a genre to really be able to hear how things are distinct in a genre. And so just like for me, I can tell like difference in house music, you know, but a lot of people just have the same beat or something like that. So I understand that. But I guess I can't really see what trend we're in now or what's coming next. It's just not really clear to me. You know, we
Yeah.
kind of had this period of like the 2000s when we saw the emergence of these huge people like Drake and Nicki Minaj and just all of these people. And I just don't know what's the next generation of people that are doing that. You know, I guess it's just a wait and see.
Yeah, yeah. Do you feel as you've gotten older, do you feel um it easier to kind of like spot kind of what's happening, you know, just as you know, like not even necessarily in this moment, but just as you know, versus when you were say 18, like do, do you feel like an old fogey when you're like listening to like newer stuff, or you know, and like, oh my God, what is this? This is not like music in my day. Or do you still feel that you come at it with the same enthusiasm that you did, say, you know, 20 years ago?
I mean, I honestly have the same enthusiasm. I mean, my aesthetics have been basically the same since birth. You know, it's like I have popular taste, but I always like that thing that's going to be a little bit edgier, a little bit. I kind of grew up during the whole punk era, so like that's always my thing. I'm always wanting something to be a little bit not raggedy, but a little bit ragged, maybe, you know, a little bit edgy. And so and I always kind of like when a pop culture moment is really connected to like an organic community or organic kind of youth culture scene or something like that. I always like to see that reflected. So yeah, so I don't particularly see any of that now, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening, and it just hasn't gotten to because the other thing that's changed is that there used to be a barometer of seeing what is kind of what has become a pop culture moment. You could usually turn on MTV, and if MTV was talking about it, it means, okay, this thing has finally kind of gotten some attention, it's kind of risen. But there's really even no source for that now. Like Rolling Stone, like I wouldn't want them to tell me what's hot. I wouldn't want, there's no way to look for what is really edgy and hot. You just kind of have to, I don't know, weed through social media and try to get a sense of it. And
yeah,
I just always go back to, I like what I like. If I hear something and great, I'm not necessarily in the digging for a whole lot of like new stuff to listen to, because I know that I'll never be an expert on that. Like I can be an expert on some older stuff, but I've always lived with the idea that my favorite song, I might hear that tomorrow. I don't kind of have these things that, oh, my favorite album has been in the past and my favorite this has been in the past. I always open up the possibility that stuff might still be to come.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a very good outlook, good way of looking at it. So you're based, you were born, raised, and spent most of your time, most of your life in Washington, D.C. But as I understand it, you live in Miami Beach now, right?
I do. I've had quite a few. Yeah, no, I lived from DC. I moved to New York to work at Entertainment Weekly and also to Vibe. And then from there, I moved to Buffalo, New York to be the pop music critic at the Buffalo News. Then I moved to Atlanta to be the pop music critic at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Then I moved to Providence, Rhode Island to be a professor at the University of Massachusetts. Then I moved to Chicago to be a professor at Northern Illinois University. And from there, I'm just like, I spent the last decade in the cold. Moving to Miami Beach, and I've been here since about like 2017. Okay. And love it.
Jose lives in Miami Beach, and he moved there, I want to say a couple of years. Time passes so quickly. I have no, maybe 2 years ago. And it's just like, okay, and I always find it interesting because I'm like, so many people I know have started moving down to Miami Beach. Do you love it?
I do. It's one of those things that because I always loved it whenever I came down here. And it's just one of those things, like, even if I'm having a really bad day, I can just like walk outside and go like, well, I love being in Miami Beach. So, if I'm going to have to be depressed, I prefer to be depressed in Miami Beach than depressed in 6 feet of snow. So it's kind of like that. But I just love it. Can't really articulate it, but I just love being down here.
I've only been to Miami Beach, I think twice, and both times were just for quick weekends. How would you describe the vibe? Like, especially having lived in so many vastly different types of environments, how would you describe the vibe and what you like about the vibe?
Well, it's changing a little bit, and I in ways that I don't necessarily like, but what I fell in love with is that I'm a person I'm a city boy. Like, I grew up in DC. So I'm not really one of those retreat people. Like, if you say, oh, we're going to secluded island with nobody there, I'm like, oh, that's boring. I'm not trying to be there. I want to hit the club and then go somewhere. So what I loved with Miami Beach was that it was like you plopped a city right on the beach, you know what I mean? And right on the prettiest part of the beach. And at the time, back in the day, it was like there were like a lot of gay clubs and a lot of everything like that. So it was like you really could get stuff. You could go and have a little beach dip and whatever, do what you do, and then go and have a really fun club night out, And so it was just the best of everything that I love, so, and in a very small, and I love walking places, and it's like that. So I fell in love with that. Post-COVID, things aren't quite as popping. A lot of the popular gay places are no longer here, and just things like that. And one thing about getting older, you always have to kind of let things evolve and kind of not hold on to the way things were, but try to like just find something else. So it's not quite the same as it used to be, but I still love it.
Totally. And but what is, right? What is,
Exactly.
nothing's quite the
Thank you.
same as it
No,
used to be.
and what will be, and what's the point of even complaining about it, right? You just have to kind of be open to joy and open to possibility and just see what's coming.
Exactly, 100%. I wanted to ask you, actually, I remember you wrote a novel as well. Tell me about your novel.
Yeah, I wrote a novel. It's called Who's Your Daddy? And it's sort of I don't know, I guess it's like reflects what I kind of look at now as sort of like a midlife crisis, but it was inspired by a group of kind of middle-aged gay men, including myself, that I hung out with in Providence, kind of like in the early 2000s. And just this was still in these times what I particularly thought were great, when small cities, there was kind of like one big gay club, and like everybody in the town, black, white, you know, gay men, lesbians, younger, older, are all in the same space. And it really offered some very interesting kind of interactions that don't often happen in society, where we are kind of segregated into our own little pockets. So it's kind of just dealing with that and kind of that period of my life, and just kind of thinking of those issues of like middle-aged and what that means in terms of being gay and not necessarily wanting a traditional marriage type relationship and that type of thing. So it kind of deals with all of those issues. And I just had always wanted to try it because I kind of like a new challenge, and I always wanted to try fiction. I found it to be so difficult that I'll never do it again. But
what was it that made it difficult for you? Say in comparison to doing
stuff. Just like making up a whole bunch of crap. Like, I mean, I'm just like not, because you asked me earlier, like, was I one of those kids sat around making up stories? No. I was like listening to music and like, reading stuff. So I that kind of just expansive imagination to just be like pondering worlds and stuff, that's not anything that came naturally or easy to me. So yeah, but I'm one of those people that if I start a challenge, I'm going to try to finish it. So it took me forever to not to get the grasp of the story, but just to kind of finish it in a way that made me happy. But I'm glad that I did it, because it's just it was just kind of like, it helped me be a much better writer, because I was very much faced with my limit. So I just think the more, the reason it helps you be a writer, the more you write, just because you find yourself in more situations where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to get myself out of this narrative dilemma or whatever. And in figuring that out, when you find a similar challenge, the next time you don't get into that paralyzed kind of writer block thing. You kind of think to yourself, oh yeah, I was able to make it over this writing hurdle in the past, so I feel confident in moving forward that I'll be able to do it this time as well.
Right. That makes sense. Do you write every day? Like, do you have days that you don't write?
Most days I don't write. I mean, yeah, most days I don't write. Because to me, the writing process is really so much about researching and then about structuring something in my head. So it's kind of like I will research until I just get this feeling of, okay, I can start telling the story now. And and that's kind of just it's sort of an intuitive thing. It's not. And so that's kind of, I just have to go into it. And when I get that feeling is when I get that feeling, so that kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about the kind of how fast I'm writing and stuff like that. Sometimes I just don't know. And because I'm doing it for myself and I had nobody kind of telling me it has to be done by this particular time, sometimes it takes me a lot longer, but just know that that's my process. And I try to stay true to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So is your main platform now, in terms of if we all just want to like get our dose of Craig, is your
Correct.
Substack your is your Substack your main platform now? Your primary platform?
Yes, Substack is great. That's the best way to keep up with me. That way, if you don't have to look at my chaotic Twitter feed, you get kind of like all of the things that I'm interested in one place, and you can kind of go to that. So yeah, it's Craig's Pop Life Substack.
I love it. How often do you post on like a regular routinely schedule, like a routine schedule, or is it just kind of like when the spirit moves you?
I just send something out every week and at some point in the weekend.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So Craig's Pop Life. And then where else? Where else can we find you on? I know you're very, very active on Twitter, like I said earlier. Like, yeah, because I was actually, since I knew we were going to chat about Tina Turner, I was like going back to like where you were talking about Tina. And I just kept scrolling up. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm just at 16 hours ago. You're like, you're like a typing demon on Twitter. And I'm just like scrolling for what felt like forever. And then I look and it's like, oh my God, I've only gone back 16 hours. You're like a typing demon on Twitter.
It's weird because I really don't think, it's kind of like, I guess when I'm on it and I respond to people and I look in it. But, almost everything that I'm doing is not. And the reason I think you mentioned earlier to do it so fast is because it's usually just I see something on Twitter and then that makes me think of a memory. And then I just kind of quickly tweet about that or like put the song that reminds me of or something like that. But it's just so easy because it's just the triggering of memories that I think people look at and they presume that I'm sitting there like researching all this stuff and everything like that. And it's like, no, it's just kind of like a wonderful walk down memory lane where I'm being kind of triggered by these different things. And so I'm just kind of spontaneously sharing this memory or spontaneously sharing a song. But it's not a work thing. It's just kind of like, it's more just sort of a release,
Yeah.
And it's really helpful in, I can just say this one thing, it's really helpful in writing to me because when I'm researching something, I always get distracted by tangents. And so I like, if I see something that's not related to what I'm working on, but I read it in the process of research, I can just tweet that out really quickly and then move on with what I'm actually supposed to be focused on, as opposed to being kind of wrapped up in that tangent. So that's one really good thing about it.
So Twitter is a form of therapy. Really fun, recalling memories, marinating on them, and releasing them.
It is. And I'm just glad, I'm very grateful that people find some value in it because again, it's just me, the accumulation of just stuff I know from being on this earth for so long. So yeah.
So what can you tell our audience your Twitter handle?
Sure, it's at Craig's Pop Life.
At Craig's Pop Life.
Try to be consistent. I try to get that branding on.
Consistency is important. Listen, it's been so fun getting to know you today. I'm so glad we got the opportunity to meet, and I've really enjoyed our conversation. You'll have to come back once the Janet Jackson book is out.
Okay, definitely. Thank you so much. This was so much fun. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining us for another episode of Showtime with Jordan Van Hessel and Friends. We will see you next week right here on Hot 702.5 FM Las Vegas. And don't forget, you can download the Hot 702.5 FM app and listen to the show in real time. And please check out hot702.5fm.com.